Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, including those watching online. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to my right or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green, where officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film or record audio of the meeting? I would advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Any speakers using the microphones in the middle may be picked up by the cameras recording the meeting, and members of the public in the public gallery behind them may have their image captured that way. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls or messages in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. I have the following members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, and that is Councillor Abby Smith and Councillor Phil Fellows. Are there any other members who wish to speak under Rule 20.1? Thank you. I have apologies from Councillor Moore, substituted by Councillor Wright, and apologies from Councillor Packman. Do I have any other apologies? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Alban.
Yes, Chair. On items 5A and 5B, as a Cabinet member, these applications are submitted by Thanet District Council. Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
Same.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright.
I'm one of the ward councillors for the Alpha Road application.
Yeah, that's fine. You are allowed to sit in as long as you're not predetermined on your voting. Thank you. Do members agree that minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 17th of September 2025 be approved as a correct record? And can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Alban and Councillor Makinson. Thank you. Any site visits will take place for committee members on the morning of Friday the 7th of November.
Sorry.
Sorry.
We didn't vote on that.
No, we didn't, did we? I was trying, wasn't I? Do members agree that the minutes be approved? Yes. Thank you. Oh, never me, I thought I was doing really well there. Okay, we do have a point of information from the Planning Applications Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. An update for members on 130 Alpha Road, Birchington, following the site visit. One additional condition is proposed to be added to the officer recommendation to approve, subject to conditions, which will be sort of further explained in the presentation by Emma. The condition number will be 13, and it will be added, which reads, prior to the commencement of works hereby permitted, including demolition and site clearance, a construction and arboricultural management plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The management plan shall include the following: details of the tree protection measures during construction to accord with British standard, a scheme for auditing tree protection during construction and subsequent reporting of this to the local planning authority, parking and turning areas for construction, delivery vehicles and site personnel, timing of deliveries, provision of wheel washing facilities, measures to control noise affecting nearby residents, dust control measures, access arrangements. Development should be carried out in accordance with the approved management plan. And the ground for that is to protect existing trees and in the interest of highway safety and neighbouring amenity in accordance with Thanet local plan policies QD02 and QD03. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 4, 130 Alpha Road, Birchington. This item is coming back after the site visit and that was held on the 3rd of October and is therefore not subject to any further public speaking. I do, however, have speaking under section 20.1, Councillor Phil Fellows. You have 3 minutes.
Evening, Chair, and evening members. Firstly, thank you for allowing the site visit on this proposal. And also thank you to those members that came along to the site visit. I'm sure they found it helpful when coming to the decision that they need to make this evening. Members who did come along to the visit would have seen for themselves the fundamental issue raised by residents and consultees in their objections. and also of those that spoke at the previous planning meeting. Also, the members who came along would have been able to understand how this application proposes an overbearing two-storey dwelling that would dominate the plot and the surrounding area, which in turn causes overlooking and loss of light to neighbouring properties. It really is unacceptable, and I'm sure my colleagues on the planning committee will agree with me. Members will have also seen for themselves that this development site is in a small cul-de-sac along a narrow private drive comprising of low-rise bungalows, where successive developments of the area have respected its character and that of its surroundings. This proposed two-storey property squeezed in between existing homes will create a feeling of enclosure where there is currently openness, and that will cause an unacceptable overshadowing presence. It's an obvious overdevelopment, and I'm sure that those who came along to the site visit would have seen that clearly. This application also goes against a number of local plan policies. The Parish Council in Birchington objected to this application on the grounds that it is in the breach of multiple neighbourhood plan policies, and this application is not compliant with the village-wide guidelines. This application also does nothing to address the housing needs of Thanet. We do not have a shortage of four-bedroom luxury homes. All this does is bring misery and upset to long-standing residents who have lived adjacent to the proposed site for a number of decades. All these reasons, along with questionable parking provision, a lack of biodiversity, a loss of biodiversity, threat to a recently TPO'd home oak tree opposite, threats to wildlife including bats and hedgehogs, loss of trees and bushes on the site, issue with drainage, and not to mention the massive upheaval to neighbours, some who are vulnerable whilst this construction takes place. This can only point to one decision this evening. I'm also sure that the site visit by committee members has demonstrated how the harms of this application significantly outweigh the benefits, if there were any at all. And therefore, this application should be refused in line of national and local planning policies. I trust my colleagues on the committee this evening will do the right thing and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The Principal Planning Officer will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this was the site outlined in red here. So 130 Alpha Road is located here, and then the application site is the side garden area to that property, with the access onto Alpha Road in this location here. And then this was aerial views of the site. So this is the application property here, and this is the application site in this location here between the application property and the neighbour Farina. And then this is the application property here with the gap between the properties where the new dwelling would be located. And then again in this location here and here. So just to remind members, this application is for a two-storey, four-bed dwelling, detached dwelling with parking for two vehicles to the front of the site. So just to remind members of the site itself. So this is number 130. So this is the host dwelling. As you heard at the previous meeting, this side element here was being demolished, and they are currently looking to build the side extension, which is taking place right now on site. This is the garden area, so this is the location of the proposed dwelling. So this is the garage on the left that was to be demolished, and the the structure in the garden here. And then again the garage here, so the site is in this location here, and this would be the location of the new parking provision for the new dwelling. And then looking back towards the access road here, so again the garage to be demolished on the right. And then looking back again at number 130, so at the site visit we walked into the garden area here and looked towards the rear boundary, looked at the vegetation that exists within the garden area. And then we looked at the proximity to the neighbouring property. So this is the neighbour, Farina. And we looked at the height of the fence and proximity to their existing windows and where the location of the proposed dwelling would be in relation to that property. We then went inside the property and looked from these three windows. So these are the three windows that would look onto the proposed dwelling, and the neighbour has raised concerns regarding outlook and light from these windows. So from within inside the property, this was the front window of the neighbour. So this is looking towards 130, you can see in that image there. So the dwelling would be in front of that property. The proposed dwelling would have a similar eaves height and ridge height to this dwelling. So it's basically that dwelling that you can see there, but closer. So this is the kitchen window, which is at the front. Then they have a study window, which is into the middle of the dwelling. And then there's a bathroom window to the rear. Then we visited the neighbouring property in Ingle Close. So we visited this property here, number 2, and stood within the rear garden here looking towards the application site. So the application site is in this location here. And then this, just going back to the actual application site, this is the access road that extends to the property. So one of the points raised by residents and members discussed on site was to do the access road and the ability to access the site using this access road, and whether there was adequate turn-in. So I have received tracking plans from the agent, which I will show you, for the parking provision within the proposed dwelling site. And then you can see the tree on the right-hand side here. So following the site visit, there was a request for this tree to be TPO'd. The council's planning assistant that deals with trees went out to visit the tree and has assessed the tree and considers it worthy of a TPO. So we are looking to put a TPO on the tree this week. And it's this reason that we have added the additional condition that was mentioned, which looks at details of how the tree would be protected during construction works, and all those details will need to come in as part of the condition to show that this tree would be protected both during works and following works as well. So again, this is just a view looking back at that tree. So the protection of the tree doesn't impact on the application, so the spread of the tree doesn't extend into the application site, so there would be no impact on the root protection area of that tree. So the only real impact would just be from construction vehicles using this site and the fact that the branches are quite low at the moment. So there's likely to be a need for a TPO application to be submitted for some minor works to the trees to potentially raise some of the crown for vehicles to get through. But that would not have a huge impact on the tree. So we feel that that is reasonable and wouldn't actually impact on the development of the site. So, and again, this is just looking at the tree from the main road. So again, just to remind members, this is the site layout plan. In terms of proximity to neighbours, it's 5.1 metres at the front here to the neighbouring property Farina, and that extends to 5.8 metres to the rear of the site, and there's a distance of 4.1 metres between the side of the dwelling and number 130. This is the tracking plan that's been submitted following the site visit. So this is showing the parking area to the front of the proposed dwelling. So you could see the 2 parking spaces here, and this is showing a vehicle, a standard vehicle of the measurements used for this one is 4.3 metres by 1.8, and how that vehicle would be able to reverse into the driveway and reverse out and exit the site. So the hedgerow that was next to the parking area here and the hedgerow here, you can see from the tracking plan, would not be impacted from the manoeuvring of the vehicle. And again, this one in the centre here just shows how a vehicle would get into one of the parking spaces, and then on the right hand side how it would get into the other parking space. So just to remind you of the design of the building, this is the front elevation. So there was concern raised with residents about the first floor window and potential overlooking, but there's a distance of 22 metres to the closest part of the dwelling in Ingle Close and 30 metres to the main elevation of that dwelling, and then 24 metres to the rear, to the nearest dwelling as well. And then these were the rear windows. So these distances are considered significant enough to, or far enough not to result in significant overlooking. Also, there's the vegetation along the boundaries that you saw at the site visit as well that does provide some screening. And then the side viaduct windows have high seal levels and also are proposed to be obscure glazed by condition. And again, the side windows here. And then just to remind you of the ground floor plan, and then the proposed first floor plan. And then this was the existing street elevation and the proposed street elevation. So as mentioned at the previous meeting, we consider that the proposed dwelling would appear in keeping with the character of the area. The ridge height has been dropped, so it now doesn't exceed the neighbouring properties. The spacing between the dwellings are considered to be acceptable and in keeping with the surrounding pattern of development. There is a need for housing, and therefore that need has to be outweighed by any harm. We consider the distance to both neighbouring properties not to result in significant harm to living conditions, and we consider the design to be in keeping. Whilst it does have a first floor window, there are other properties around that do have accommodation at first floor level, and therefore we consider the design wouldn't significantly harm the surrounding character of the area. The access isn't raising any concern because it already serves a number of other properties, and as you saw from the tracking, there is space for vehicles to manoeuvre within the site without blocking the access road for the neighbouring properties. And a UU has been submitted and signed, so that has secured the SPA contribution, and therefore it is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation for approval be adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Can I have speakers from those who were present at the site visit first, if possible, if anyone wants to speak? Councillor Alban?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very pleased I went on the site visit. It tells more about the situation than just looking at the drawing. And I'm grateful for the residents who let us into their properties so that we could have a look. I just want to make a couple of points, really. Just whilst it matters to the residents, the length of time that people have lived in a property or a road is not a planning consideration. Okay, we've got to go on what the application is. I also felt on the site visit that there is only one property that is really affected, and that is the one that's immediately, as you're staring at the property, to the left. Having gone into the kitchen there and had a look out of the window, I do think that the development as is would have a real impact on the neighbours, and I think it's too close. I think it's too much of a bulk there. But I also think that, strange as it may seem after what I've just said, that a building could actually go on there, albeit a single-storey building. That would be my view. But for others who went, I'd be pleased to hear what they've got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Garner, you put your hand up. Were you at the site visit? I'm sorry if I'm... I was. You was. I'll take you next then. Sorry. I'm just trying to remember who was there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with nearly everything that Councillor Alban has said. The main impact that I saw was when we went into the neighbour's kitchen and into the room behind the kitchen. The new dwelling is going to be extremely close. It's going to be have a real significant impact on whoever's living in that dwelling, and it's going to have an impact. I think it's right to call it overbearing, and also it's going to have it's going to have an impact on the light as well. I think it's going to make it a lot darker. I wouldn't like to say, as Councillor Alban says, all we can deal with is what's before us, and the application before us is for that size of a dwelling next to it, which I think is too big. What could go there is another matter, and that's not for us to decide here. We're just, as you say, just looking at what's in front of us. So I'm struggling with it at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
I feel the same. I think that the impact that it's going to have on that particular neighbour is going to plunge their house into darkness. And for various reasons that have already been stated, I have major concerns about it. And the officer has said it's necessary that we need to build up the housing stock. These two houses are not going to be for general, so they are going to be very expensive houses, which will make no difference to our housing stock. Thank you.
Councillor Christian Bright.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies I wasn't able to attend last week. I have a couple of questions, and then I have a general point. I think my first question is really a question on sort of accuracy. How far from, not from the boundary, but from the actual boundary of the house, the existing house? I'll wait till that finishes. All right. So, yeah. So how far is the wall of the house to the, not the boundary of the land, but the house to the house? Do you know the distance there that's covered? Because I'm not sure the difference that, having not been on site, I'm not sure the difference of whether it's a one-storey building or a two-storey building would actually make if it's that close. That's my question. I mean, my other point is, frankly, any points on whether it's for local people or whether it's the sort of housing we need, I think are moot, to be quite honest with you. I don't think we should be deciding on that. If someone's moving into a 4-bedroom house, they might be moving into a 2-bedroom house, which is freeing up something entirely different. So I think that's completely irrelevant. But I am interested to know what the specifics are in terms of the distance.
Sorry, did you say the side elevation of the neighbour to...
Yeah, so you've got the house that's being
proposed dwelling?
overlooked. How far are the actual houses from one another?
Oh, sorry, the
proposed development.
overlooking, not the property next door. You're talking about the overlooking distance.
The affected neighbour, because it's
Oh, the
clear
one
that there's
next
going to be a
door,
neighbour
okay.
that's affected. How far are... If I'm standing in that kitchen, looking out,
Yeah.
how far am I going to be standing from the new house that's being built?
Okay, well, the distance here at the front here is 5.1 from the side elevation to... So the kitchen window was in this location here at the front. Then the neighbour's study was here and their bathroom was here at the back. So obviously bathroom is a non-habitable room, so we wouldn't be concerned about that window. The study could potentially be a bedroom, so it could be a habitable room window, and the kitchen, it depends how big it was. I can't remember actually now if there was a seating area or not, but in terms of distance, though, 5.1 from the window there to the side elevation here, and then it's going to be slightly further for the study. So it's 5.8 by the time you get to here, so maybe 5.5 possibly in the middle point here from the study window. And then as you can see from the street elevation, in terms of height, so there's a boundary fence then between the neighbouring property and the proposed development, and then the eaves height of the proposed development is the same, well, actually it shows in here just slightly below the eaves height of the neighbour, and then the roof is pitching away. So yeah, in terms of what was mentioned about whether it was single storey, all that would happen there is that the eaves would be at the same level, and obviously the roof pitch could be potentially lower if it became single storey, but the actual impact from the wall and up to eaves level would be the same. So the window is obviously looking onto that side wall of that bungalow, so it's an assessment as to whether that distance on the outlook and light of that window is acceptable, and that distance we consider it is, especially with the fence in between the two.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's really good. I'm going to listen to other members, please, before I make a decision.
Well, I actually don't think I had any more hands up. So as I was also at the site visit, I've just written my own little comment that I'm now going to say. I was one of the ones that asked about the tracking for the parking, and having looked at the tracking map, I'm not convinced that it will be realistic when you get real people and real cars. I appreciate that they've drawn it out, but my broader feeling on it agrees with what's been said so far, and one additional property towards the council's need to provide sufficient housing supply does not sufficiently outweigh the negative impact on the neighbour or the general area. So I'm not keen on it. And do I have any other speakers? Councillor Wing.
Apologies, I wasn't able to go to the site visit either. Could you just put the overhead image up of the plans? Oh, sorry, of the plans. There was an overhead one, I think. Yeah, that one there. It's quite interesting because if the building had been moved to the back of the site, obviously we're not seeing what's there, then would the impact on the neighbours be less or more? I don't know, because I do think that the impact on the neighbours is too great. But it's quite interesting that if it had been moved to the back of the site, then would it have made a difference to the neighbours, or would there have been another impact on another set of neighbours on the other end? I just think when you look at the whole site, it's just overdevelopment, and there is a massive impact on that neighbour, which I don't think is acceptable. And it was interesting to hear from the people that did go on the site visit that they feel exactly the same. So it sort of confirms what I felt at the last meeting. So thank you, the people that went.
Councillor Matterface.
Thank you. I wasn't able to go on the site visit either, but just going back, this is a little road. There will be 3 houses on there, and I think Emma said parking for 2 cars, but this is a 4-bedroom house. It's quite possible there'll be a lot more than 2 cars if it's family with grown-up children. So where else would they be able to park cars? Because I don't know this road at all. It's just a little cut through, basically. So is there space for other cars to be parked somewhere close other than on the main road?
Well, the main road is probably the place that you would park, because the main road, all the properties are pretty much detached with their own parking, so there is lots of on-street capacity. As we saw from the site visit, everyone was able to park quite close to the site. Yeah. But within the actual site itself, no, there wouldn't be anywhere else that you could park. It literally will... I've lost the plan now, sorry.
You said the parking for 2 cars?
Yeah, so the parking for 2 cars for this property, and then 2 parking spaces are being retained for the existing property. But yeah, there wouldn't be any space other than that. I mean, I suppose you can potentially put a car in here, but then the other 2 wouldn't be able to get out. But as a visitor, maybe you could. But yeah, that's all though that we'd be looking for a dwelling of this size, is for that number of parking spaces. And then obviously if anybody else was visiting the property, there is the space in the street which is quite close to the site.
So a quick follow-up, how far from this property to the, I mean, on the photo it's difficult to judge, how far from this new proposed property to the road?
$100 yards. Sorry, I can go back to yards anytime. I actually have Councillor Rattigan next.
Just a quick one. Obviously, I really appreciate the concerns of neighbours and sort of the effects. But just to sort of under planning, obviously laws, they have met have they met all the requirements with regards to like the distances and things like that. What I'm concerned is, you know, are we setting people up? Because if it goes to appeal, it's then going to get overturned. If it goes on, just I'm saying, if the planning sort of laws are there and they've adhered to them, it's then going to be sort of, you know, hard then to turn it down.
Yeah, Councillor Wright, if you want to come back first and then we'll come back.
Okay, can I just clarify for Councillor Matterface, the parking in Alpha Road is not really suitable. Most of the properties have got drop curbs and lots of the residents can't park down there themselves.
Thank you, Chair. I will just touch on that point in terms of, again, the officer assessment is that there's sufficient capacity for parking on site for 2 spaces, and in the event that there is additional parking, you're talking about at most 1, maybe 2 vehicles, and there is capacity on the street, in our view, for that to not cause a severe impact on the highway safety, which is the test. It's severe harm that's got to be caused for us to refuse anything on highway safety. I did just want to pick up there the point that Councillor Rattigan mentioned. The view of members that's been expressed in the debate relates really primarily to the impact on the neighbour to the left that you can see in the image and the section that's there on the screen. In terms of what an inspector would look at, whilst I appreciate the view that a number of members have said that, you know, 1 dwelling isn't going to have a significant impact on housing stock, an inspector will say any dwelling will have a significant impact on housing stock because we have an identified need enshrined in the national guidance. So it's not going to have significant weight, clearly, because it's only a single dwelling, but there will be public benefits from that will be weighed in favour of the development. However, in terms of considering the impact on neighbours, if it's considered that there will be significant harm to the living conditions of the neighbouring property, then that can outweigh those benefits. The issues that we've put forward in the report and in the assessment relate to looking at the existing outlook from those windows. They are side windows. Some of them are habitable rooms, but they face onto a boundary fence. So what you're talking about then, as Emma's outlined, is what you can see above the fence to the eaves, and then you're looking at the fact that the roof, as you can see here, is then pitching away. Now, to the point that Councillor Alban and Councillor Garner have mentioned, in terms of the scale of what's being proposed, and Emma mentioned this as well, if you were to reduce the pitch of that roof, remove the roof accommodation and potentially make it appear similar to it's going to be slightly narrower, but the bungalow to the right, so you're hipping the roof at the front and the back, you would reduce the bulk, but you would still, where the study and kitchen are, you will still have a roof pitching away. And I don't think anyone's going to suggest a flat roof bungalow because it would not fit in with the character of the area. So it is, that's the reason why we've come to the decision that we think this would still work because you're pitching away, but clearly the impact could be reduced through amendments. The question for members is if that is sufficient to alleviate the concerns of members in terms of if those amendments were to be sought. Thank you.
Councillor Matterface.
Looking at the report, it talks about the fact planning permission has been granted to extend the property by a side extension, including the demolition of several small extensions. So how would that's got planning permission because it's in the report. So that would obviously push part of the 130 towards the neighbour. So is there a major difference between the size of that side extension and obviously part of what we're talking about tonight? Just give me some idea of scale.
The extension is actually shown on this plan. So this extension to the side of number 130 is what's been approved, and they've shown it on the plan. Yeah. So, that. And there's another plan further down in the somewhere in the presentation. Oh yeah, there you go. That's the plan that was approved for the extension. So the extension is in this area here. So it's set back from the front, and that's it from the side view, and then that's the front view of it. So it's a flat roof extension just to the side of the property, and that was just to relocate windows. So I think there were obviously there was the extension you can see currently on the building that's currently glazed, fully glazed, and then this has relocated a window to the rear and a door to the front, and made that mainly solid, presumably to protect privacy of this property from the development itself potentially. But yeah, that is actually shown in there. So in terms of spacing between properties, that is the spacing that you'd end up with the extension that's been approved.
So there is a fallback position for 130 anyway, if this is...
Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think perhaps not a planning reason, I guess, but a human reason. Having stood in the neighbour's house and looked, I'm as tall as that fence is. Well, I could see over the fence. Right, he's not. But then you've got that bulk above that, and that's, for me, I thought, because I do the washing up at home, right? So I'll be at that sink in there. How depressing that is to look out of there and look onto that, and that's what, and I'd hate that because I'm chained to the sink at least 3 times a day. But I mean, I'll just say that. But that for me is the main concern that I have. Thank you, Chair.
Any other speakers? Councillor Garner.
Only to back up what Councillor Alban is saying. I agree with him.
Yeah. I found the thought of the other house being there oppressive when I stood there, so I needed to hear what other people thought as well. That does bring me to the end of speakers. Do officers want to come back at all? One last. In that case, we will go to the vote. So just to remind you that the officer's recommendation is to approve. All those in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation, thank you. Keep your hands up. And those against? Abstentions? So that's lost. Thank you. Yep. Oh.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. As the motion is lost, obviously we've heard the issues very clearly in terms of the impact on the neighbouring property. So as I mentioned, sorry, that's very loud. As I mentioned, the issue is whether or not the scheme as it is can be amended to deal with the issue and impact on the neighbours. Obviously, in this situation, as the motion's fallen, there are options to remove the accommodation within the roof slope, hip the front, hip the back, so that you remove the bedroom that's upstairs, and the accommodation that's upstairs, and then see whether or not the resiting of the dwelling, admittedly you can only incrementally go one way, but it could be sited further to the rear. If you've removed the front and rear windows, there's less of a concern about overlooking to the rear if you were to push the dwelling back. There is clearly a pattern of development point here. We don't want something that's just going to look out of keeping because you've set it back. So there are considerations there, but it's for members to determine whether or not, if they think amendments can be sought to still try and get a dwelling on the site without causing harm to neighbouring properties, or whether or not actually there isn't something that would work that would avoid that would deal with the impact on neighbours. So if the chair agrees, I'd suggest a short adjournment for anyone that has a potential motion to come up and have a discussion about it.
So we will have a brief adjournment, and anyone who wants to come forward and help write the next motion. I've already got Councillor Alban. Anyone else? Thank you. Just looks like the two of us. Okay, so we now reconvened. Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What I think is important is for the residents of with the proposal that we're just going to make, is that the application as is unacceptable. So, but what we think, as I said at the start of it, I think a dwelling could go on the site, and we'll be asking officers to go back to the owner of the site to ask him to relocate if they'd be willing to alter the application for it to go further back in the site and to reduce the bulk. And that may or may not, because it would have to come back here. So they would have to come back here, and then we would consider, and the owner may decide, no, he'll want to go to appeal. So, but we're giving him a chance. That's the basis of the appeal,
Thank you. I'm just going to now hand over to Mr Livingstone, who is going to read out the actual wording.
Thank you. No,
based on what you said.
I don't know about that, Councillor Orban. So the motion would be to defer to officers to seek amendments to reduce the scale and re-site the dwelling, and to bring back to councillors for determination of the application.
So, and seconded by Councillor Christian Bright. Do members agree? Can I have votes in favour, please? That's carried. Thank you. Right, thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 5C, which is the St Nicholas Campsite, Court Road, St Nicholas at Wade. Public speaking. Next, speaking in favour of the application is Julian Wilkinson. I tell you what, we just pause a moment as we've got people leaving before you start speaking, and then we'll start. Okay, thank you. Julian Wilkinson, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Julian Wilkinson, and I'm a director at Countium Land and Development Limited, the applicant. This proposal seeks approval for 13 residential dwellings in a mix of sizes, constructed in high-quality traditional materials, close to the village core and adjacent to the conservation area. The layout provides for a pleasant, low-density, high-quality residential development with good-sized private gardens, an area of landscaped open space within the centre of the site, private and visitor parking spaces, and which retains almost all of the existing well-established boundary hedges. A new access and visibility displays into the site from Court Road will remove a short section of hedging, which will allow views through to the frontage of plots 1 to 5, which face towards Court Road, with the existing access being closed and replaced with new hedging. As part of the scheme, a new pedestrian footpath will be provided across the site behind the retained frontage hedge. This will extend along the northern side of Court Road from the application site to join up with the existing pavement towards the Down Barton Road junction, which will improve pedestrian safety in this part of St Nicholas at Wade and is a positive benefit for residents. The Council's local plan policy, SP35, sets out an objective to ensure new development is built to the highest attainable quality to improve the quality of life for residents. This proposal has held this at its core throughout the design process, providing a low-density, high-quality scheme with ample private space and welcoming public space. As a full detailed application, what you see before you is what will be built, giving certainty to local residents, the parish council, and you as elected members that a high-quality development will be provided. This is reflected in the low public objection to this scheme, with just 2 objections being received. The Conservation Officer says of the scheme in his report, the spacious gardens, scale and design appear suitably characterful and sensitive with a good palette of colours, and concludes the houses will remain subservient with no harm to their setting or that of the conservation area. This scheme will provide 13 high-quality homes to provide choice and meet a variety of housing needs. The site is within safe walking distance to St Nicholas at Wade Primary School, the church, existing public houses, the local shop and post office, and the Bell Meadow recreation area. encouraging sustainable living and providing an economic boost to the village. The scheme also secures land a short distance away on the northern side of the A299 Thanet Way for biodiversity net gain purposes and retains and improves significant landscaping on the site. We very much hope that your officer's positive recommendation can be supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have speaking on behalf of St Nicholas at Wade Parish Council, Councillor Divers. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. I am speaking on behalf of the Parish Council to formally object to the proposal to build 13 houses on the campsite grounds and St Nicholas at Wade. This application further adds to the overdevelopment of St Nicholas at Wade, which over the last 5 years has seen a total of approximately 147 houses built and approved, representing almost a 40% increase in dwellings, with subsequent loss of green spaces, altering the character of the village for all time. With this vast increase, there has been no upgrade in additional infrastructure. As I speak, one resident is having his sewer unblocked for the 7th time since this increase in developments began. This issue is now common throughout the village, yet Southern Water propose no upgrade to the current system. The 3 roads leading in and out of the village follow their historical layout and are now mainly single lane, reflecting the nature of construction throughout and alongside these roads and a subsequent increase in traffic and parking. As a village, we are still awaiting the completion of previous developments, which has left us with unmade roads, example Parish Close, incomplete and impassable footpaths, Manor Road, with no access for disabled and pedestrians. The Crumps Farm development is about to start within approximately 500 metres, and the only crossroads, this is all nearby, the only crossroad in the village, nearby to the primary school, this with the inevitable congestion, with no footpath in that direction. I would suggest we have, as a village, reached saturation point. This development appears purely speculative, with no affordable housing. Only 1 2-bedroom property is within the 13 houses. This will only add to the number of unsold houses within the village. 13 houses, I understand no 106 money is available to help improve amenities within the village. Therefore, this application actually provides no benefit at all to the residents of St Nicholas at Wade. If this committee were to approve the application, I would ask for a stipulation be made that within the construction management plan that the parish council is consulted in full in order to avoid the oncoming disaster of the Crumps Farm proposal. Those management plan is currently under consideration, which is to route all construction, demolition and earthwork traffic through the heart of the village and conservation area, coming off the A28 along the length street to Shuart Lane.
You have reached your 3 minutes.
Okay.
Can you wind up, please?
Yes, certainly. Conversation when an alternative route is readily and easily available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1, Councillor Smith, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This application should be refused for several critical reasons. Affordable housing, TDC policy SP23 requires 30% affordable housing, but the applicant claims that no housing associations are interested and it's not viable. Can this be acceptable during a housing crisis? Heritage harm. This development will impact 3 Grade 2 listed buildings plus the conservation area. The applicant admits less than substantial harm, But where are the safeguards and where are the public benefits to outweigh it? The NPPF says that heritage assets deserve great weight in your decision making. Overdevelopment in the wrong location. The site at the northwestern edge of St Nicholas is essentially in countryside. TDC policy SP13 calls for modest provision at rural settlements. 14 houses, or 13 depending on which paragraph you read, is not modest. It's speculative development that will urbanise a rural edge and set a dangerous precedent. Visitor economy. TDC's tourism and culture team said they cannot support this loss of touring accommodation because camping and touring generate more economic benefit, £3.8 million versus the 3.4 million from static accommodation. But they also generate 7.2 billion nationally. The report gives this moderate weight, but in a district dependent on its visitor economy, permanent loss of the tourism site should be taken seriously. Drainage. The drainage testing shows very low infiltration, and in an era of increased flooding, this is a worrying risk. Cumulative impact. TDC admits there have been multiple recent developments in St Nicholas at Wade, yet there's no proper assessment of the strain on local infrastructure, school, or the village's character. There's a fundamental error that undermines trust in that the title says 13 dwellings and paragraph 1.1 says 14, then reverts back to 13. Which is it, and why should we trust any other calculations? I urge you to refuse this application and send a clear message that proper planning, policy compliance, and community needs matter in Thanet. Thank you.
Thank you. The Planning Applications Manager will now outline the... It's not you? Okay. I'm just reading what I'm told here. It's Annabelle is going to outline the report.
I'll come in a bit.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the application site outlined in red. As has been mentioned, there are some listed buildings around the site. It isn't within the conservation area, but it is adjacent to it. So this is the application site here in this location. And this is a zoomed in, excuse me, view of the application site. So the campsite with its access here. So this is the access to the campsite. This is the hedge that's been talked about along the front, where some alterations will be made and there will be a small loss of hedgerow, but that's it as existing. This is looking back the other way at the hedge along there. And now we're going to go into the site and look at some views from within it. So again, we're at the access to the site. So this is looking at the site and its rear boundary and its western boundary. We're moving and looking at the rear of the site there. This is the eastern edge of the site, and you can see the buildings and structures that are on the site. So we've got some play equipment and some toilet blocks associated with the use of the site as a campsite. This is looking at the western edge of the site and the frontage of the site here with the hedgerows. And this is looking at the eastern edge and the access currently to the site. And this is Street House, which is one of the listed buildings, which is adjacent, the neighbour to the application site. So, as has been mentioned, it's an application for residential units, and there are in fact 13 dwellings, just to make that clear. They will be set out within the site, and it will have a frontage onto Court Road and some green space in the middle and a layout which wraps around internal roads here. They will all be 2-storey in height and will be using a variety of materials and designs and taking inspiration from other dwellings within the village. So this is a street scene, or bits of a street scene from within the site. So this property here is plot 7, and this sits here within the site, so you get a feel for sort of quite classical design, simplistic, but a sort of using materials you'd expect to find within the site, within the village as a whole. Plot 10 is here, and it sits within this location towards the rear of the site here. And then we have the section along the bottom as a street scene, which is C. So you'd have plot 1, plot 2 in this location here, the access road coming through, and a small terrace of 3 units here. So that gives a feel for what you'd see at the sort of frontage of the site. So, as has been mentioned, we're just going to have a quick look. I won't show you all the elevations or floor plans for all the units, but we will have a quick look at some of them, just to get a feel for them. So this is the terrace that we mentioned earlier. So this sits close with plot 5 being the closest dwelling to the listed building at Street House. So it's a terrace, quite classical in design, and they are obviously one of the smaller units within the site. So this is the rear elevation of those plots and the 2 side elevations. And we're going to have a quick look at plot 10, which is one of the larger units in the site, which is a 5-bed unit. So that's its front elevation. Again, it's fairly traditional in design. It has brickwork, but also some cladding and some traditional features like chimneys. Sorry. Its rear elevation and its 2 side elevations. So it's been designed, sorry, just to go back to the layout of the site. It is considered there would be a good standard of accommodation for future occupiers. They all would have gardens and parking spaces. They all meet the national described space standards. And in terms of, there would not be any mutual overlooking or any adverse impacts between dwellings within the site in terms of loss of light or overlooking. And they also, given the distances and the arrangement of units, would not have an adverse impact on any surrounding dwellings. So it's not considered there'd be any adverse impact in terms of neighbour amenity. So in terms of highways, which is obviously been a point that's been mentioned of concern, each dwelling would at least have 2 parking spaces, with some of the larger units having up to 4 parking spaces. There are some visitor parking spaces identified as well to serve the dwellings. Essentially there are 3 here. These are the blue parking spaces identified here, and they would be available obviously for visitors to this, and there may be scope, as highways have indicated, for other visitor parking to maybe take place on the internal road if in suitable locations. As has been mentioned, the existing access sits to the site, vehicular access to the site sits in this location here. This will be closed off or for vehicles, but it will be reduced in width and become a pedestrian access to the site. And the access for vehicles will be more centrally located in this location here. It will involve, as we've seen, a small section of hedgerow having to be removed, but that is considered to be acceptable in the wider context of the development. So highways initially raised concerns, and it has been raised by particularly the parish council, about lack of footpaths and accessibility potentially into the rest of the village from the site. So it is proposed that a footpath will be put forward. Part of the footpath will run inside the new development, so this is within the development, and then you will come out from that development. It will be public accessible for all members, all people. It would not be exclusive or gated to avoid, to prevent access from general members of the public. But then you would go on to the main part of Court Road and a footpath running along past Street House in this location. So just to give you an idea of where that is, so you'd come along here, you'd come out of the site and then start walking along a footpath that would be along here. And so you'd sort of this, you're coming along in this instance here, so we've seen the view there, Street House is here, and then you're walking along, so you'd have the footpath would then continue past here. This is Street House again, so the footpath would run along here. And then this again is the footpath running along. And then you would be looking at the footpath coming along here, and then you can see where it connects to the existing footpath of Court Road. We don't have detailed plans of the footpath as yet, but we do have a condition for those plans to be submitted and approved, and also a safety audit for that footpath to be secured as well. Just to cover off the principle of development and the loss of the tourist accommodation, apologies, I should have done that sooner in the presentation. There is weight to be given to the loss of the tourist accommodation as a campsite, but it is considered to be moderate weight. We are not aware it employs a lot of people, but it does bring benefits with people coming obviously and spending time and staying in the district and visiting places, etc., within the village and further afield. But it is considered that whilst that has moderate weight, there is significant weight to be given to the provision of 13 houses within the district that would add to the housing supply. So it is considered that the provision of houses would outweigh the loss of the tourist accommodation campsite in this instance. I will hand over to Ian to come in on very exciting things like biodiversity net gain.
Thank you, Annabelle. So in terms of the application, so a biodiversity metric was submitted with the application, which identified that on the site at the moment there, in terms of habitat units, in terms of biodiversity net gain units, there's a baseline of 4.55 units from the what's defined as poor quality neutral grassland. So you'll have seen from the photos, it's just grassland. And this is the plan that came with the biodiversity submission. There's also some hedgerow units as well from both the trees and the sort of boundary treatments. Now, in terms of the proposal, because of the nature of building the houses on the site, it does mean that there is going to be a reduction in the habitat units on the site. So whilst it's proposed to retain as much of the hedgerow and boundary treatments all across the site, other than where the vehicular access is, and retaining the trees that are actually on this site within the red line on the eastern boundary, the habitat that's to be created that's not in residential gardens is only the area in the middle of the site, which is put forward to be neutral grassland. And because in proposed developments, when you're looking at the biodiversity value of new developments, you can't take account of private gardens. It has a very low base because you can't force the maintenance of them, and obviously developments happen, etc. So this site has looked at to providing their statutory 10% by looking off-site, as already mentioned. So in terms of that site itself, it's owned by the owner of this site. It's the triangle land. If you're looking at the image on the left, you have the campsite that you can actually see on the Google map when I circle it here. So that's the campsite itself. And then you're going across the Thanet Way and you're looking at the triangle of land that's on Potton Street and Chambers Wall, I think it is the road here. And so this is the site that's been looked at in terms of providing the off-site provision. So with the submission of a specific report and a habitat management and monitoring plan for this off-site provision, it has concluded that there's a sufficient uplift that you can get to get probably a 40% improvement on that site in terms of area habitat that you can get. Now, whilst that obviously provides an increase on site, it needs to be that that site actually takes the account of the loss on the other site. So because of the nature of constructing this site, the habitat in the middle of the site is going to be lost because you have to build the houses. So they will have to create the habitat on this site, which amounts to, I think it's 2.3 units on this site. And then the rest of the units to get to the 10% need to go off-site. And what that means is that there are two separate conditions that are proposed on the application. So one is to get a habitat plan for this site, which would obligate the provision of that habitat to be created, to be maintained over 30 years. And then it's to secure the submitted habitat plan for the off-site site, both of which are going to be obligated to be implemented via the 106 agreement. So both of them need to do that because we've got an off-site development, and the way that we have to do that is we have to obligate it through a Section 106 agreement. That also includes a monitoring fee, which will pay for council officers to attend over that 30-year period to check what's been done as things progress. It does also allow for some provision for an updated habitat management plan as time goes on, and there is the automatic condition, which isn't stated in the list of conditions at the front of the report. There's an automatic condition that goes on with any planning permission, which is an exempt from B&G, which will require a biodiversity game plan to come in as well. So we do think that this covers off, and it's relatively rare that when you're looking at an off-site site, you can actually identify where that is, and it is in obviously very close proximity. There is no risk here that it's outside the district or outside whilst it's outside the village confines, it's obviously very close in proximity. In terms of the other part that I'm just going to cover off, which relates to viability. So you'll note that we've included in the agenda pack the independent review of the viability assessment that was submitted, and in terms of just going through that, in terms of the development costs and the gross development value of the proposed development, the assessment that's been done on the submission considers that to be accurate in terms of the values and how much it's going to cost to build the site. The issue of contention in the report relates to the benchmark land value, how much the appellant values the land, and it's our view, from taking account of our consultant's view, that actually that's been overestimated. Now that would normally, obviously, that makes the viability look worse if obviously you need to get a certain return to actually make sure that you would bring the site forward and induce the sale. Even though, in this instance, even if you reduce the benchmark land value to $500,000 from, I think it's 1.7, the site is still unviable in providing affordable housing on site, so providing the 30% on site. And it can only account for the 235,000 of contributions that KCC have requested, as well as the SAM's contribution and the biodiversity monitoring as well. And that would mean that that development could come forward viably. So the policy SP23 that's been mentioned, as members will all be aware, includes provision that this can be reduced, the requirement for 30% on site, if it's proven by the viability appraisal coming in. We do think that that has happened, and it has been put forward to our satisfaction to be able to recommend approval on that basis. Just to pick up the point about the planning obligations as well in terms of the contributions, as we've talked a few times, members, about contributions requested by KCC, obviously that relates to things that aren't necessarily in the village, and that is something that does come forward, and obviously that's because provision of some of these services simply does not occur on that local level. It does occur on a wider level than that. So we do think that this does bring benefit to the village if those residents that are in the village actually are using the services more broadly across the district. It's worth noting as well that the education contribution is a contribution which is stated, this is about 90,000, the primary education contribution. It's a contribution that is earmarked potentially to go towards the new primary school at Birchington, but it's also potentially going towards the provision of additional school places within the Thanet villages and Birchington catchment. So that it means that if there were, in the next few years, a project at the primary school in St Nicholas, then that money could be used towards a project there. But it hasn't been defined yet, and obviously part of this comes from if this development comes forward, when that money gets paid, what the projects are that KCC are moving forward at the moment. As everyone will know as well, it's non-selective in terms of where you would go, depending on in this site, children could go to the primary school, and I'm sure they would want to, given it's so close, but that's not necessarily automatically what would happen if for whatever reason they would go elsewhere. So we think the provision of the contribution hits all the requirements of the SIL regulations, and therefore can be justified. So just to summarise, we do think that the development is outside the identified village confines, but as members will know, those village confines are not given weight anymore, given that we are in presumption in favour of development, especially looking at housing development when we have the identified need that we do. That means that there has to be significant harm to outweigh those identified benefits of providing 13 residential properties, as well as the benefits that do sort of stem from providing, for example, a footpath along the front of the site and connecting in with the existing footpath network. Whilst we do acknowledge the fact that there is harm from the loss of the tourist accommodation, it is considered that it's outweighed by the benefits of the 13 houses coming forward, and therefore the recommendation in this instance is to defer and delegate for approval, subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement in line with the heads of terms that are outlined in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. One of the fundamental issues that I'm sure fellow members of the committee will help me to resolve is around the viability. And that is, this isn't an allocated site in the local plan. So when sites are allocated for housing in the local plan, there is an assumption that those sites are viable sites and so will be able to deliver under policy SP23. That's the starting point anyway, and go on.
Could I just jump in? So the whole plan is looked at for a whole plan viability assessment, and that looks at loading all sorts of things, including all the KCC contributions, all of the costs of doing certain things like providing nationally described space standard housing, any other requirements that are put forward, and affordable housing. It doesn't go into the detail of individual sites in terms of what the impact might be from, on costs from developing those sites. So whilst a general rule would be to suggest, quite rightly, as you did, that allocated housing sites should be expected to provide 30%, it may be the case that they can't, because obviously we allocate brownfield land, and as members will recall, there are a number of issues sometimes with brownfield land coming forward when it comes to needing remediation of contamination, demolition of buildings, etc. But to your point, yes, this is a flat site, which is outside the urban confines, but yes, is not allocated.
No, it's not allocated. So it isn't a brownfield site, so there isn't a lot of money to spend on it to make it more viable. So I think it is a fair assumption for us to make that a similar type site, fields that are allocated for housing in the local plan, you would expect them to bring forward to deliver under SP23, and that you would get your 30% affordable housing. So, like I say, this isn't an allocated site. So the applicant has come forward with this site to deliver housing with, from the outset, no plan to deliver any affordable housing. This is a site that's been brought forward that will never deliver any affordable housing. I think that's a fair assumption to make on my part. So that's why to different degrees, we all agree that SP23 is an important policy, and that affordable housing is important to this district, as is housing in general, but affordable housing is key. That is what we really need. Yet this application is being brought forward with no intention of any affordable housing. Now there are pros and cons to that, and I'm sure others will have a potentially different view to me on that, but to my mind it sort of makes it an unviable application from the get-go. I mean, there are other issues with this that maybe we'll come on to, but I would like to just make that point and be persuaded by others that isn't actually the case.
Councillor Christian Bright.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of points that I wanted to make. I think there were some points made earlier about the number of unsold houses from previous developments. So I'm assuming that's not pertinent at all to this application. We're looking at this application in view of its own merits. I think the point about balancing tourism with development is important. The only point I would make to that is, I'm assuming there is a reason for them, the campsite, to decide to change direction and put this forward for housing. And I would assume that whoever's moving into those 13 houses will bring economic benefits and more to the district in spending within the village, working within the district, etc. So I don't really, at the moment, I fail to see any huge issues with this as an application. The one point that I would like to pick up on, however, is Councillor Divers made a point about a construction management plan. So this is obviously a conservation area, and I actually live in a conservation area, and we have a development very similar to this one actually on the outside of it. And there has been an extensive conservation management plan, construction management plan, that means we don't get any heavy traffic going through the village, which I think actually would be quite detrimental. So I would like to hear a little bit more about that and an officer's thoughts on that, please.
Condition 19 is the condition that we're proposing, which would include the requirement for a construction management plan to come in prior to the commencement of development. It does include the requirement for details of the routing of construction delivery vehicles to and from the site. And as alluded to, there's a separate consideration in terms of the Crumps Farm development and what that's doing. But I think it's a relevant point to think that in terms of timeline, if we are aware of a development site in the vicinity that's coming forward and has a particular construction management plan, that obviously we do look to try and ensure that we're not going to compound any issues if you've got multiple sites that are coming forward in the village, to ensure that things like construction vehicle routing, but obviously other things as well to do with where vehicles are parking, etc. There is of course disruption that definitely does happen with any construction, but that's why we put the condition on to try and coordinate as best as possible with the highway authority about movements that how they're coming in via the network. Again, it's difficult to say definitely that the developments are going to come forward at the same time, but we do obviously have an idea of what happens on site because of the different triggers that we have on these different conditions means that we do have a level of control already built into the proposed condition that would cover it in our view.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Wright.
Okay, you're probably going to think I'm mad for saying this. Thank you, Steve. I'm here. I get that we need the houses, but I also get that there is a big resurgence in people staying at home to stay in the UK and camping. Camping died. The camping industry was very, very low. It's now becoming more popular, partly because people can't afford to go on big expensive holidays, but also some people have started to use campsites at home to prevent going on planes and using for climate issues. As I said, I did say you would think I was mad.
I think there's no. We're certainly, as officers, we're not disputing the value of the site and the type of tourist accommodation. Obviously, in terms of the circumstances that have been put forward to us, it's that the owner is looking to retire, and obviously it doesn't generate any real employment on the site from its current use. It's literally a vacant site with some, and as you've seen, relatively limited facilities involved. The viability assessment does look at, when talking about that issue of what the benchmark land value is, it looks at other campsites and sees and compares the value of them. And I think even given the concerns that have kind of raised in that viability assessment about what's the value of how the site is and what it might need to be redeveloped into a more modern campsite, it still in and of itself has a value. However, given its limited size, it is considered that, again, the benefit of the 13 houses that would come forward, and obviously the inclusion of the footpath, does outweigh that harm. We don't have, we've got a little bit of information about the economic outputs of it, but it is still, it's a relatively small site. It's not the whole site. There's paddocks obviously at the back. There's a sort of fence across the site. So, we have taken account of it, but we do acknowledge that there is an impact.
Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, Mr. Lewis has just said basically what I was going to say, having read the report, and on the use of the campsite is not all year round, although obviously you wouldn't want to camp out in January, but it's not just for that. It's the facilities that they've got are old. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way. That is just that they are, and the facilities that most people require on a campsite these days are totally out of the blue in comparison to this particular site and its current use. The 30% of affordable housing, not having that, both Councillor Goro and myself have obviously stood up in the past and say, and stamped my foot and all that kind of stuff. But there are times at which we've found out that the 30% affordable is not relevant at times, depending on the circumstances of the site. My particular view in this application is that it is a good development. I like the design of development, I like the layout of the development, and not only that, I find it sustainable. It's a sustainable development, and whilst I've listened to other members, I'm mindful to go along with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, I mean, this is a greenfield site, basically. Without, the problems that the brownfield site would bring. Yet you're recommending acceptance without any contribution at all to affordable housing, whether that's on site or off site. I just wondered how you justify that.
It's the evidence of the report that's appended to the item. It has gone into the detail of looking at a a market assessment of what the value of these houses will sell for in this area, looking at comparable values, looking at the development cost per square metres of each individual house, look at all the other costs that are associated with any housing development, and then looking at the residual land value against the benchmark land value of what the site would sell for as its current use, which shows on an evidential basis, at this point in time, that the site isn't viable to provide either a contribution or the actual on-site provision. It is something that the policy makes provision for in terms of allowing the reduction in instances where it's proven via evidence and independent assessment. I would also say that in part it's because of the number of units that are proposed. I'm not suggesting that this site should provide more. I think for a character and appearance issue it definitely shouldn't. But the point would be that if you move up in number of houses, unsurprisingly, sites get more viable. And for sites such as this to come forward, these, they're just major developments by the 13 houses. Members that have been around for a while will remember it used to be 15 houses would trigger the 30% affordable housing. That's been dropped quite rightly, so you're looking at 11 or more. We look at whether or not you should provide 30%. But in this instance, they've demonstrated, which we have assessed, that it viably couldn't come forward with affordable housing. And we do think even without that, there are still benefits of these 13 market houses coming forward.
Councillor Matterface.
Thank you. I mean, this campsite's actually closed, isn't it, leading the report? The owner can't afford to maintain it, so if the housing is refused, it's just going to be a greenfield site. It's just going to be left until somebody comes along at some point in the future who may want to build more houses, and then we have to discuss that again. I looked at the viability, looking at some of the other sites that the report includes. I mean, they've got swimming pools and they've got catering facilities. This one's got neither. It's just got a couple of outbuildings, and that's obviously why people have stopped visiting. He obviously isn't in the position to develop it himself, so we have to look at what happens if we refuse this application. We just have a site that's left unmaintained, presumably. It's not agricultural land, although obviously at some point it was. It's just a green field. There has been used a pretty basic campsite, presumably without even hookup facilities. So it is, I mean, looking at the data that's in the report, the number of people attending has obviously diminished quite markedly in the last few years, so he obviously considers it's financially not viable anymore, and he's looking for an alternative, and this is his alternative option. Though I did want to ask one question. Annabelle talked about when they're creating the footpath, because there isn't one. This would mean narrowing the road, though, wouldn't it? I mean, the highway itself, they're not going to compulsory purchase people's garden walls, so the road itself is going to be slightly narrower, so it's not going to be so easy for vehicles to pass each other, so there'd have to be, hence your safety audit, I assume. And in case Councillor Wing mentions it, there is a bus service out to this area, the number 8 going to Canterbury. Okay.
I just was going to make my own comment of my own thoughts, and actually Mr Livingstone has already commented some of it. Was that if you quadrupled the number of properties, you might get the viability for affordable housing up, but then it would be very much out of keeping with the village that it's next to, given it would be a very high density. If you took off 3 houses, that little terrace at the front, then we wouldn't even be talking about viability. So it's difficult. There's no easy answer, but those were just what I was thinking. I'm going to hand over to Mr Livingstone now.
Thank you. Yeah, just to touch on the point, Councillor Matterface, that you've mentioned in terms of, yes, there is a reduction in width. KCC have provided the definitive highway boundaries as part of this, and that's one of the reasons why the application has been delayed, because it was to try and make sure that the land that would be used for the footpath was under the control of KCC, which means that it would come as a Section 278 agreement through the Highway Act. Members will recall the application at Hoo Farm, which I will mention for those of you that are around in Minster. We want to make sure that there are no such errors from KCC when this site comes forward to ensure that the footpath does get provided. One of the reasons why on these plans that you're seeing here is it's showing a 4.8 width to where the highway starts, is to ensure that that's retained as part of it. And as you say, it would have the safety audit, which would have to come forward anyway for a 278 agreement with highway authorities. So we do think it's sufficient that, it will, there is a potential that it does slow traffic along that stretch, which it's not, as someone that's driven it relatively recently, it's not particularly clear what the speed limit is at that point. And I think that doesn't cause any highway safety concerns, but irrespective of that, it will be subject to an agreement under the Highway Act, so highways will be looking at it very specifically. And there are provisions about the speed limit within the Crumps Farm application that members may recall to actually look at the speed limit in the vicinity. So there are a few different sort of interlinking parts, but we think that there is some benefit to providing, and it can be provided.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you. I do think the loss of a campsite is quite significant. I mean, I often go off in my camper van and use sites that we've got no hookup, but I do accept the fact that most campsites have got remarkably more better facilities than this one. I think it is the only, alongside Nethercourt, the only fully full campsite that hasn't got any other static thing in there. So it is quite sad that we don't have better camping facilities in the area, because most other areas do have. Whether that's a reason to not allow this, I don't know. But I want to understand the affordable housing percentage, because is there other ways of getting some affordable housing in there? I think it was a Moncton one Moncton Village one, where we had a self-build site that came just outside the village that we approved. Actually, it was recommended for a refusal. And is that another way of trying to create a more affordable housing situation? I also, given we have no affordable housing here, not even 10%. I'm quite concerned that they're mainly larger houses rather than smaller houses. I mean, I'm not sure I know many people locally who could buy the bigger houses on this site. So I do have real issues with the affordability, and you've explained some of it by increasing the density of the houses, then the viability of the land improves. But is there another way of trying to diversify? So, somebody could buy a plot of land on there and build their own house, which would be cheaper than buying one that a developer had built. I don't know. I suppose I just get really concerned that we keep getting applications where the affordable housing is nowhere near 30%, or it's 30% and then it's knocked back because the development site has been sold on and it becomes non-viable, when what we actually need in this area desperately is cheap, affordable housing to rent and to buy. That is the main issue we have locally. So I just really conflicted with the site.
So to pick up the point, there's no requirement for self-build plots within this scale of development. We do have self-build requirements which kick in on a lot of the strategic allocated sites that we do. There isn't anything to preclude, if they're sold on the open market, an affordable housing provider purchasing them if they were to get grant. It's very difficult to think that they would be able to get a grant from Homes England for this, just simply because the value of them is still in increase. And as you say, there is an element of the type of accommodation that's created and what that does in terms of requirements. Now, there's certainly an affordable housing need for larger properties. I'm not saying that, but we've looked at the composition of the mix, and the mix does skew for the larger properties on this development. We don't think that has a tangible harm in terms of what the local plan is trying to bring forward across the 17,000 houses, and what the bigger sites are going to bring forward in terms of 1 beds and 2 beds and 3 beds, which obviously aren't coming forward in great number on this site. It might be useful to know that on some of the other sites in St Nicholas that have been mentioned that have come forward along Manor Road, there is 30% affordable housing on those sites, and they are larger than this in terms of number of houses. You're looking at 39 houses on one site and 40 to 50 houses on another site. So there are affordable houses coming forward in the village, but this site, they've demonstrated through evidence, which we've obviously assessed, as to why it can't be provided. It doesn't preclude something coming forward separate from the planning system, but in terms of the permission, they have done everything that the policy requires them to do.
On the off-site biodiversity net gain, you mentioned that it's managed for 30 years. Does that mean it's protected from any possibility of a planning application for housing on that plot of land for 30 years as well?
It doesn't preclude someone making an application on it, but obviously in terms of what has to happen with that site, it has to be put on the register, the national register, with regards to BNG sites. So that's an obligation that's within the template 106 that we'll be seeking for this. And therefore it's identified. We are going to be, as I say, monitoring it, recording it. So therefore, if someone were to put a planning application on that site, we would refuse it, because ultimately it links back to the consent that we've granted and what's needed to offset the impact of this development. So it's very similar to when, if we put a planning condition on something to do with, for example, open space on a housing development, and then someone puts in an application, we could refuse it because there was a reason why we secured that open space in the previous application. So whilst it doesn't preclude, as far as I'm aware, that couldn't stop a landowner putting in an application on it, we would refuse it.
To appeal, could it be overturned? So I guess what I'm asking is about, this is the first one where we've seen an off-site biodiversity net gain. So is there ever a situation where a planning application on that off-site could come in, we could automatically refuse it, but then it goes to appeal and is overturned?
Because of the nature of the BNG case law, there's no case that certainly I'm aware of that's had any sort of national publicity where that sort of thing's happened, simply because these sites haven't really come forward yet in terms of BNG. Again, I would simply imagine that the inspector would take very much account of BNG in the same way that we would.
Do I have any other speakers? No. In that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation to defer and delegate to officers for approval. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. That concludes the public speaking for this meeting. Oh, sorry, yes, it does conclude the public speaking for this meeting, at which point I need to wait for Councillors Alban and Bright to depart, as interest was declared earlier for the next items. Thank you. I will now call upon the clerk to read out the remaining planning applications. If a member wishes to reserve an application, will they please call out as the clerk reads? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have AO1, which is 7 Guildford Lawn, Ramsgate, and this application is for a listed building consent for the replacement of timber-painted single-glazed sliding sash windows to the front and rear elevation. Then we have AO2, which is the same address, 7 Guildford Lawn in Ramsgate, but this application is for the listed building consent for the formation of new opening together with concrete foundation and installation of gate to rear boundary wall.
Thank you. Can I have a proposer to move that the applications that have not been reserved be determined in accordance with the officer's recommendation? Councillor Uzeki, seconded by Councillor Rattigan. Do members agree? Thank you. For the benefit of the public, I will now call upon the clerk to read out the applications that have been determined.
Thank you, Chair. It's AO1 7 Guildford Lawn, Ramsgate, and AO2 7 Guildford Lawn in Ramsgate again.
Thank you. That concludes the business for this meeting. So thank you everyone for your attendance and good night.